The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all those participating today. We will give another 2 or 3 minutes to allow those who are just trying to get in at this current time to join and to be able to see us and hear us. So bear with us for another couple of minutes. Yeah, as it looks as if we had quite a stable number of attendees now. Seems like everybody who wanted to join has managed to join in. So very warm welcome to the 4th event in our Hermes Medical Education series. It's a pleasure for me to have Andy Prideaux here with us today again, talking about organ and voxel-based dosimetry in relation to theranostics. Andy will give a theoretical presentation and he will go into some practical hints towards the end of his lecture and show the Hermes Medical product for organ-based dosimetry at the end of this session. Please refrain from questions from interrupting Andy. You can post your questions in the questions area here. We will record them and we will answer them question by question after the presentation of Andy. You can either just say you have a question or just post your question. We will unmute you to be able to have you live with us after the presentation. Yeah, the Hermes educational series have established quite nice format, and we're trying to give you a product independent and informational and educational program. We have had great feedback from the first 3 events in that series, and that has encouraged us to have one tonight, and it encouraged us also to continue that after the summer. So we will go on summer break for 2 months, and we will start again after August, in the beginning of September, with another couple of events in that series. You can see the event details on our homepage. There's a medical education section on the Hermes Medical homepage. Please go there, visit us. We will keep that page updated and inform you about the program after summer. We will also record today's session, and the video recording of it should be available via the homepage or by request by email to us. So in case your colleagues have missed today's meeting, we will record it and can send the link to them. Yeah, today we have Andy Prideaux talking about organ and voxel-based dosimetry in relation to theranostics. It's a follow-up of his first meeting, of his first lecture, where he gave us more of the background and the theory of dosimetry. Today, Andy is going into more practical aspects. As Andy has been a very vital part of the development of our software, please do not hesitate to ask him questions, whatever you want to know about dosimetry, about the Hermes implementation of dosimetry. Do not hesitate and ask him after the lecture. Welcome, Andy. And please start your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So yes, as Marcus has already kind of indicated, what I intend to do yet this time was after the last presentation, we got a request that there be a little more practical, and I've maybe erred too far in the other direction at this time here. My intention is that I'm going to actually go through what dosimetry process we're attempting to do with our software without using our software. So I'm going to do this like I did prior to Hermes. We're going to go through this with Excel spreadsheets and imaging viewers, segmentation, and all. So this will be a very alive broadcast. Now, to try and keep this from getting incredibly tedious, I'm going to take a clue or two from some of the baking shows that I like to watch, and occasionally we'll have I made one of these earlier, and here's what it looks like when you do it well. So we'll skip ahead a little bit to keep it from becoming too tedious, but I am going to show you a lot of the ins and outs of doing dosimetry. Then we'll talk after doing a dosimetry for exactly what we see in the image. We'll do talk about translational, where we look toward taking some animal studies and essentially humanizing them.
Andy, sorry to interrupt you. A few people are saying that you sound quite quiet, although that Marcus was actually a little bit louder. Maybe you could adjust your microphone, perhaps?
Let me see if I can. Let me see. I'm not seeing a place to do that. Hold on just a second.
Or just speak a little louder, perhaps, if the microphone's...
All right, I gave it a go. My volume was already maxed, so I will just try and talk a little louder.
Thanks very much, Andy.
But yeah. So like I said, we'll go through a practical, and we'll do this as if we weren't using the Hermes dosimetry software, but doing most of the steps that it does. We'll hit the translational, humanizing animal data, which is usually a requirement for regulatory commissions to take something new to market. Then we'll take a look at Theranostics, the idea of that we give a image, a sentinel dose, a small dose, maybe not even of the same isotope, in order to predict what a theranostic or a therapy dose would handle as. We'll show that practical example as well, starting on what we'd already learned. We'll go into a question and answer phase where we, as was already said, please type your answers as they occur to you, but we'll actually, stop and address those questions. And then if you wish to leave at that point, completely acceptable. But if you want to stay around and see our software in action, then there will be a small demo afterwards of the software doing the exact same case that we're going to do without it. So you can see what I hope is a little bit more streamlined process than what I'm going to show. But very much a black box, and you're going to miss it. So again, I guess I've kind of given the next slide away, maybe. There's that rundown that I was just talking about. So let's begin with a dosimetric evaluation. The case that I have here, I'm going to bring up. I do have 6 time points. In this particular case, the patient had to void prior to the first image, and so that's why there's a big catheter bag inside the first image. We do have a standard in all of these that didn't quite get placed in the same spot every time. We have a lesion up in the head that we will follow. And then as I look at this, the organs that are prominent are the liver, the kidneys, the spleen, and the urinary bladder, though I didn't put it in the spreadsheet, so we won't do that one. And that'll be kind of what my first evaluation when I look at this is to just kind of see what am I going to follow. what am I seeing take up more activity than the rest of the body is uniformly doing, and that's my indication. The other thing, which I don't have a good way to show, is knowing what the parameters for these are. In truth, all 6 of these time points were acquired under exactly the same parameters, the same scan speed and length, but I'm going to pretend that the first 2 will be acquired under the same conditions. The ones where the patient then has come back, another day to do a follow-up, we'll make the assumption that the camera was done at a faster time during those ones. So we will look at what we do if we don't have uniform acquisition parameters. But let's see. So we're going to talk about that, changing the SPECT, the acquisition parameters. But here's the way that right now we try and make those all the same. For whole body scan, we do it by duration, but not just pure duration, which is a DICOM tag. We actually do scan length divided by scan velocity. And this gives us the ability to account for the fact that sometimes you may not acquire the entire bed position capability of a whole body SPECT, and you might have a shorter field of view in some than the others. In that case, you would have a shorter duration, but you might have the same amount of time over each given view, or you might likewise have a shorter time, but with the same duration. So we can account for that if we look at the scan length and the scan velocity. And for the people who are interested, those are the DICOM tags for those 2. When we go to do quantification for a SPECT, which I'm not going to look at today, our first choice is quantitative SPECT. And that gives us becquerels per cc, which we switch into, and we don't have to worry about counts per second because that's been dealt with in the quantitative SPECT aspect of it. However, when that's not available, the formula we use is that it is 1 over the actual frame duration, which is a DICOM tag for how much time one frame got, and then the number of projections. And so again, DICOM tags that indicate this. Then of course with PET, those are always going to be in becquerels per cc. We've got it quantitative, so why not use it? And then the last thing is, if we are mixing media, if we are talking about SPECT with planar, we're going to use an overlapping region to set a conversion factor. Basically saying all the counts in the SPECT should be convertible to all of the counts in a whole body, the section of the whole body that covers that same region. So we make that conversion to give us a way to go back and forth. The last thing is that we need to calculate the time elapsed from injection for each image. So let's look at what we've got here. If we look at the scans, the first thing I can tell you is from prior knowledge, the injection time was 1400 on 12/12 of 2006. And the amount injected was 3 millicuries when corrected, or that's what we're going to say it is, because I'm not sure if I know that exact value. The first time point occurred also on 12/12 of 2006. And up until now, thanks to the redundancy of 12 and 12, I haven't chosen a side for date format. 1431. And the second one also occurred on that time. Now I will skip taking us through the rest of them, but I just wanted to show that what I'm doing here, the time is, whoops, wrong program got clicked. the second time point occurred at 1519. So we'll put that in. And what we're doing is figuring out exactly how much time has passed. That's these hours. By definition, I think I told you that the first one is we're going to have this counts normalization. The parameters are such that that one we'll call the anchor. We will do a normalization in a little bit, but this gives me a way to account for how many counts we're seeing versus counts per second. It's exactly the same for the second one, but then like we said, it's going to speed up the camera, and so we're going to need a multiplicative factor of 1.5 for the rest of them. Now we have to go in and actually segment out before we can go any further. So I'm going to bring up this is just a hybrid viewer because it's what I have access to. So it is our software, but it is not our dosimetry package. And I'm going to draw regions of interest on this time point. So I've got my freehand set up. The first thing I'm going to draw is a standard, which I will actually ignore from here on in this particular case. But I'll call it so that we could talk about what we would subtract to get remainder body. Then actually my remainder body, which I'm going to do next, and I might spend a little more time making this better if I were actually going to use this to determine this patient's outcome, but I'm not. Let me just show you that we can edit that when you do get it a little wild. And there we go. We'll rename this to the whole body. And I did include, for what it's worth, I actually included some standard that I didn't mean to, but I did include this pail of counts that came from the output of the patient, because I do want to scale to all of the counts that justify the amount of activity we expect to be in that patient, and that includes the urine for that first time point. Let's go ahead and define the lesion. I've been a little generous with that, but it is what it is. And then on this time point, let's do next the liver, which we can see here pretty well. And you can see where this could get a little long. Left kidney. We'll do the right kidney. And there are little tricks that I can do after I draw the spleen, I suppose. Let's do that real quick. But again, I'm not trying to show you too much of, here's how our software works in this, more the science. But I could do things like copy a mirrored version of the spleen over to the same time point in posterior. I could obviously do that with all and should, just to save us a little time before I hop ahead and do all of these I've already done this for us. And here's what it looks like that's coming up in a second, but I do want to get through at least one of them. Before we do skip that part. So I have all of my organs and my spleen. The only thing I don't have is the standard. There we go. Brilliant. So it would be a matter of copying and pasting some of these values. I'm going to take this little window off screen so that so that it doesn't fall behind, and I'm going to fill in a couple of these, and then we will skip ahead. So like I said, the liver, the anterior view, I'm reading off here, 418. The posterior for the liver is 284,462. And likewise, I'll just I do want to show the kidneys and the spleen because they are a little different, but more importantly is the whole body, which I put up here at the top. And for this, I need 5,1, and 479. Again, I'm just taking these as the direct raw counts from the image. I'll pop them back up here just real quick before we move on. So I've calculated. Let's bring that back up. You can see these. I've calculated the total body as the geometric mean of the whole body images that we have, and then I've decay corrected that number multiplied by an exponential of the time elapsed over the physical half-life, which in this case is 6.647, because this is lutetium. And so we've defined our decay correction right there. We've now got how many counts we expect were in the image at the exact second of injection into the patient. And that takes us through this. Like I said, we'll fill this out, but in true form, we're going to skip ahead a little and just have all of that done for us. So we're a little bit further along now. And it's at this point, if we go back to momentarily, we are essentially finished with that. We're going on to the next one. So we've done the parameters to scale. We've gone all through that normalization. We segmented the regions, which you just saw me do. And now we need to create a Geo Mean for anterior and posterior images. We're also going to do a little bit of normalization in that. So once we've got all those values, which is the longest part of this, for the liver, what we're going to do is set this equal to square root of anterior times posterior. We're going to then multiply this by our counts normalization factor, which is again for dealing with how the acquisition might have changed. And finally, we're going to, because Olinda expects percent injected dose, we have our counts are current in, if you will, current dose, but this value right here, which is again how many counts we expected in the image at the time of acquisition, stands in for our activity at injection. So because those two are in the same units, we get the same as if we had divided the actual activity over right now versus the injected activity by doing it in counts as our surrogate. And I believe I've put that in, so I can actually just copy down across, and we can do that. There is a little bit of difference, so I will have to do this one a little separately. In the kidneys, because Olinda treats kidneys as kidneys and not left and right, but I find it very hard to draw a left and right kidney at the same time. We want the sum of, I did that wrong. Pay no attention, excuse me. We want the two anteriors added together times the two posteriors. And I haven't fixed it yet, but I will. So, as I said, this one's wrong. Let's get rid of that one and make that anterior. Let's make this one. And now we have generated the equivalent of the prior one. We just had that complication of it needing to be a sum. We're going to multiply it by the normalization factor and divide by our number of counts we expected at time of injection. So we've got these normalized now. And we would continue this, but again, once more, I have done this ahead of time. Let's take a look at what it looks like when it's completed. And there we go. We've got all of them. We've also done this for the lesion, but all of them are just a Geo Mean with the exception of the kidneys, which again is about having the sum of those two. So we've generated that. As we move on, we need to now generate time activity curve and normalized cumulative activity. So we've scaled the values to a common duration, or CPS. We've divided by the injected activity. You saw me do that. And we now need to fit data to a function to get an integral to infinity, to talk about how many decays are going to eventually happen. Now, there is a curve fitting in Olinda, but again, I'm trying to do as much as I can without using the software, where I have alternatives other than our own. So I'm going to use this LabFit. This is a free software. It's very good for curve fitting, maybe a little tedious in use. And you are correct. I did use the days equation instead of hours, so we can go back and fix that right away. Except it's going to, all my pre-aheads that I made that mistake on, well, just bear with me on that. So if I go back to here and I take my curve fitting, I also have my values. I'm going to have them a little bit off to the side because I need my hours first, which are not something I've yet made that same mistake. 0.052. I'm going to do some copying and pasting here. Apologies. I tried really hard to do I've got this already done for you on this part. I will only do this for the liver, because I know that it's going to be needed to see once to understand the process and not go through all of them. It's also going to be a bit time consuming. Control C, Control V. So there's my time points. And now I'm going to take these values that we did with the counts here, the normalized counts. I'm going to put those as my Y values, and this is for the liver. You can also, of course, do a curve fitting, a regression in Excel if you're fine with a single exponential. The nice thing about this LabFit is it gives you so many opportunities for using different fits. Clicked in the wrong place. Took me a second to resolve that. Sorry. And done. So I'm going to call this my liver planar. And I'll replace that one. We do have, of course, a curve that we can look at, and then we say we want to do a user fit. I already have done this one ahead of time. So this is my isotope decay, where it is A times exponential minus BX plus C times exponential minus DX. That's 4 parameters to fit, and we say okay. We can give it initial guesses if we want to. It's usually pretty good about converging, but if it doesn't, you can change those a little bit. We'll do a single power, and we'll look at the values. So I'm going to probably end up running this again. We can look at what our chi-squared was, and we can see that it's okay. Let's take a look at what it looks like as a graph, just to be sure that we're happy with the fit. So there's our curve. It's not too bad. We could maybe do better, but works for me. So go back in here. We'll generate really quick. I have yet to find how to go back to it. I'm sure you can. But this is the best way for me to generate it. and I would copy and paste these values back into our Excel spreadsheet. Now under a new page here of what our A, B, C, and D are for the liver. So 0.01686 and likewise 0.42. Wow, that's different than what I had gotten before, but not by a lot. Oh, it just flipped which one was which. 6, 9, then I missed a 0 in front. So you're seeing maybe the motivation for why I was so keen when starting at Hermes to implement a workflow that tried to keep things all in one line and do a lot of the automated work for you and a lot less copy and pasting or typing, because it would be real easy to transpose a number and so on. Then we take advantage of we're finished with the lab fit for now, so that's good. Let's get it out of our way. Take advantage of known integrals for exponentials, the integral to infinity, and you're going to see this equation here before long. In fact, let's take a look. We're going to integrate to infinity to get these final dose calculations. If I bring that back up, this known integral from 0 to infinity of a to the b minus a to the exponential to the times exponential to the minus bt for dt is just a. Oops, guess we need an equal sign. Divided by b. And since we have two exponentials multiplied by each other, thanks to Euler, we can say that this is like so. It's just the sum of those two. So there's my normalized cumulative activity that I should get. And once again, we've done one of these before, and we can skip to the answer. So I've got here, I haven't actually done the normalized cumulative activity yet, but on this one I did. We can take a look at what the graph of these look like, but we've also got this normalized cumulative activity. And that is the answer we've been looking for this whole time. With these values to put in, as well as the whole body one that I didn't, we can go into Olinda now. And we can say that this is a lutetium 177. The patient here is an adult male. And the kinetics that we needed to fill in are finally what we've just gotten here. So I can say for the liver that we get 1.1035. And it has been pointed out, I saw, and they were absolutely correct, that I used physical decay of lutetium in hours when it should have been days. So everything here is off by a factor of 24 at least. But we'll just consider it a very metastable version of lutetium or something, rather than go through and correct this while doing a presentation. Lastly, we'll do the lesion in a minute. There should be a total body part that I didn't calculate either. And we'll go to doses. And this is where we get the doses per organ. We could then go in and modify if we knew the value of masses, we can change those here. I don't have those, but by default, it is the average human's mass, which it averages to be right, but mean mass. However, what we would do is go in there and actually, from a CT or whatever, we could estimate the mass of different organs and put them in. That would give us our organ dose, and then we would separately go into our model, and we would use a special model here. And for our lesion, we got 0.1707. We would calculate the dose for the sphere. Oops. and then we could look up where, let's call it an 8-gram mass. That's right. Come back to it here. Yeah, there's a problem if I don't click away. And then we can find the 8-gram, and there's our dose per millicurie injected, megabecquerel injected, excuse me, in milligray. And there we go. That is our tumor's self-dose, which we would report separately. We have our organ doses from when we did this a few seconds ago here. And we'd be able to record this into some format for consideration on how to do treatment. This is really the dosimetry for exactly what was given to this patient. And now we can start moving on with that evaluation, that basis. We can move on to the next part, which would be translational dosimetry. So now we're talking about how do we consider mouse trials to predict what might happen in a person. And for Hermes, for Olinda's original paperwork, we're going to repeat everything, but instead of drawing these organs on a human study, we'll do them on a mouse, or we'll do it through sacrifice, whatever. We'll look up, but we're going to also need to record the animal's total mass and their organ masses per study. We're going to look up the ICRP-89 human average masses, which we have handy, and then we're going to employ the method by Kirshner, Ice, and all 1975. This publication came out. The idea is that this percent injected dose per organ times the total mass of the mouse, in this case, as an example, the animal, multiplied by the mass of the organ of a human that equates, so liver, time all over the mass of average human should give you the percent injected dose per organ of that human. Let's take a look at what that looks like. I know it's so if we come in here, we have this. I've altered our previous numbers to be, and what we're going to do is we're going to say that this anterior liver is the human anterior liver. Excuse me, the mouse. Mouse is on top. We're going to make our human equivalent on the bottom. That is going to be divided by the mouse's liver mass. We're going to be multiplying by the mass of the total mouse. We are going to then multiply by the human liver mass and divide by the total mass of a human. That would give us this. And if we come through here and keep all the things that are going to stay the same through the power of Excel and the dollar sign, we should be able to populate all of these. And with those, we can come across. And that'll do the liver. We would have to do this again for all of these. We find ourselves with the same thing. We can now do our counts derived from these ones. So just like before, it's the geometric mean times the CPS normalization, which we would adjust based on how fast the acquisition is going over each element. And we would do that for kidney, and we would do it for spleen. We would do a bi-exponential fit like before. We would generate the new normalized cumulative activity. And then, of course, the idea would be that we would come in here, we would do our isotope. I will not take us all the way through it, but I just want to make it clear that instead of choosing this mouse model, we would pick both maybe our adult male and our adult female. Actually, we would just do the male at this point because we've used the male organs. We would have to do this again with the average female organ masses and total body mass in order to get the right input for it. And for the kinetics, we would put, just like before, these values, which would be our analog from mouse to human, and we would generate all the same doses that we did before. The only other thing I'd call to attention is that you'll notice I'm not tracking any kind of tumor or lesion in this one, and that's because all these are self doses anyway, and we would not really be able to make too much of an assessment until then. When we're doing these mouse to human models, we're looking at the safety of giving these treatments for what they do to normal organs, since there's not a great translational method for tumor to tumor. That would be investigated a little bit later. And that takes us to the next step. I'm going to hit you with a lot of equations. I already talked about some of them, but here's the good thing. What I'm getting to is a very much simpler equation to show how easy this could be if you follow it through. So we're going to do everything we did prior for an actual dosimetry for our given isotope and whatever it's attached to. But now that's going to be our imaging isotope, and we're going to say that we would put that same ligand with a different therapy isotope. And what would we be able to predict for giving such a thing? So the good news is that this is, like I said, we're going to take the function, the activity, as a function of time, effective, meaning what we would measure, right? What we would see in our image. And that's going to be considered a product of the physical decay of that isotope that we did for imaging, and a biological clearance, which is dictated by the ligand. And if we follow through on this, there's also going to be a therapy one, which we would assume is the physical decay of the therapy isotope, but it's that same biological. And this is where we make an assumption. You'll notice no subset of image or therapy. If we assume that the biological clearance is the same, irregardless of what isotope is on it, then we can do the following. The biological will, of course, be the effective for imaging over the physical of imaging. We plug that back in to our second equation, and our therapy full integral of the therapy effective is going to be, which, by the way, is our NCA, or not normalized cumulative activity, that we're going to feed into Olinda, is going to be the full integral of the physical half-life of therapy. Well, we know the exact function of the physical half-life of therapy, and the integral multiplied by the integral of the biological part. So isolating it a little further, the therapy part is going to be now plugging back in just a division of the effective part over the physical part. From our imaging isotope only. When we switch over which ones are on the, just multiply through and distribute it, we can say that the effective now can sit here by itself. This is what we did in our imaging point to get to dose, so we know exactly how to get this, and we're left with an integral of physical of the therapeutic agent over physical activity of the imaging agent multiplied. We let those two be separate, and we end up finally at the normalized cumulative activity of therapy, something that we took the long time to derive in the first place, is really just the NCA of imaging, which is what we already showed how to do, apologies, times a ratio of the physical half-lives, or the lambdas, in fact. So I've got lambda therapy over physical. And it's when we do that, we can see this is not very tough. It's actually something straightforward. So here's the imaging side of things we did. I'm going to make an assumption that's I'm going to use yttrium 90 as my therapy part. This is completely nonsense, but just to show I needed something that was not lutetium, and I chose that. what we would do is we would take this normalized cumulative activity and we would multiply by therapy divided by imaging. And because in this case my lutetium, air quotes lutetium, is 6.64 hours instead of 6.64 days as it should be, this would be 10 times larger. In fact, it should be 2.4 smaller. But the other thing is I need to put my values so that it does carry across. And we're at normalized cumulative activity for what we expect the therapy to behave as, and putting that into Olinda, we would generate our same doses, including the lesion, which we would do in the sphere. So all we're doing really is a multiplicative factor of these normalized cumulative activities, which we covered in depth how to get. And that multiplicative factor then is the indication of what should happen with our therapy dose. Of course, everything Olinda generates, because it takes injected dose percentage as its input, is per either millicurie or megabecquerel, depending on which table you're reading, which units you choose. But we can now just scale it by whatever value. So those are a direct linear scaling. And that takes us through everything that I wanted to show you, the how to do by hand without use of software, to get to what we hope to do in a lot cleaner and faster approach. But I thought it was the best to show what's going on in our program by doing it without. At this point, I suppose I'm ready for questions, and we'll handle those, and then we'll do a demo of the dosimetry software, which eliminates a lot of these steps.
Great. Well, thanks very much there, Andy. I mean, one of the things that is quite clear from what you've just gone through is to show the advantage of having a streamlined software application to do all of those steps in one fell swoop without having to have the inefficiencies of copying things between tables and the possible errors that might happen as you do so. We've had a number of questions during the session, actually, as well as subsequent to it. And the first one was from Jill Tipping, and this was during the initial ROI drawing, where she was asking, why are you defining on whole body? Won't you have to do it all again for Voxel? Which, of course, sort of brings you onto another subject of as to why you're looking at this in whole body image, plain whole body imaging rather than Voxel. So maybe if you could address that, and then we could come back to Joe.
Yeah, so I would say you're absolutely right. What I wanted to show on this one, I know I put Voxel in the initial statement, and we can cover it. I thought I'd get through the organ level dosimetry, which I suppose later became evident from after this question was asked, but this was specifically for organ level dosimetry, and the reason for whole body was for normalization. I wanted to know how much activity was in that first image, and that was one thing that, because they collected the urine, I had a really good idea. It's all physical decay at the time of that first image, but every count should be an analog for how much activity. There's some conversion factor, which I'm not worried about. They're going to cancel out. But by doing that decay correction, the whole body gave me something that represented the initial amount of activity, represented in counts in this case, so that later I could divide by that amount and get percent injected dose, which of course is the thing that you need to integrate for residence time, as it used to be called, or normalized cumulative activity in the follow-up in Nolinda. So yeah, it was about normalization. It was the least technological method that we have. If we implement quantitative SPECT, of of course, whole different animal, right? We've got an exact value in the organs that we've drawn because it is quantitative, and we can do that as a percentage of that exact becquerels over the becquerels that were occurring that we injected into the patient. And that's a better normalization, but I had only planar in this particular case. The same techniques that I showed here, maybe not the practical side of them, but the concept is what we're doing in Voxel. We're going to take voxels and follow them in time, and we're going to look at those individual clearances, and we're going to then create a total number of disintegrations per voxel, but by curve fitting, and generate voxel later, but that was outside of this one.
Great, thanks, Andy. I wondered if that answered Jill's question. And Jill, I've actually unmuted you, so I don't know if you would like to comment on that.
Okay, yes, thank you for that, Andy. I think I was just thrown because I was expecting the Voxel to be brought in far earlier than you've mentioned it. Yeah. But yes, you're quite right. Normalization is absolutely essential throughout the whole dosimetry chain.
Yeah, agreed. I apologize. I was very ambitious when I brought this topic up, and as I wrote it, I realized how little time I was going to actually have and skipped on Voxel. So maybe we'll do another one at some point where I bring this to Voxel, but the concept is still there.
Agreed.
That's great. Thanks very much, Jill. I know you have another question. We'll come back to that later because I'll keep it in context if that's okay. There's another question here from Erin Ross. Would you not draw regions on the later time point where uptake is clearer and then copy back to earlier time points?
Absolutely, you can. You certainly can, and you know, a lot of times wherever you have enough information to inform what the extent of the organ or the lesion is, you should use it. If you can copy back, that's amazing. Sometimes, of course, they move around, and so I felt like what that first time point, I was doing it as a demo. But you're absolutely correct. You should always, whatever you can do to get the best representation of the organs that you're representing is what you really should get. So point made. But I also think I had enough here to segment them out decently.
That's great. Thanks very much, Andy. Erin, I've actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would also point out one of the other points made. It wasn't particularly a question, so I understand. Is that I did indeed flip my left and right kidneys. I was hoping nobody would notice. I noticed it a little late and didn't have time to redo all this prep work, but I did in fact switch. Be careful anterior and posterior views and make sure you're on the one you think you are. I tried to be consistent, and of course it doesn't matter the way we do this, but I did flip them. So don't do exactly what I do, right?
And it's a great test of to check who's listening as well, I guess, or watching, should I say. So, Erin, I wasn't sure, did you want to make a comment on that? I've just unmuted you. If not, then we can move on. The next question actually is from, I'm sorry if I get the name wrong, but it's from Yasser Al-Sharkawi. You said that you wanted to raise a question, Yasser, and but you haven't typed it. So I'll unmute you. So if you'd like to raise it, now's a good opportunity to do so. Hello, Yasser. We couldn't hear that. If you're trying to say something.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for this very good knowledge. I believe I have a question about the mask for our PET scan. If we are able to do the scan or the mask for the scan after finish, which program can we use? If so, which program can we use? And if not, why not? The mask.
Yes, I don't.
Mask for
Andy, I don't know.
hot area. Sorry, I will explain. The mask for the hot area, like bladder, or any hot area, any hot spot area, for our PET scan. Can we do mask after finish?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple ways that you can do
To
it.
exclude this, yeah, to exclude this from our image.
In our program, there is an ability to mask, which would allow you to do that if you needed to. But in addition, if the question is, how do I get the mass, right? You could find the volume if you had any kind of CT, MR, any kind of information about the anatomy of the patient, something transmission instead of emission, or an MR, and you could make a simple assumption like the average mass of a liver is just over 1.0 grams per cubic centimeter. So let's make that assumption, and we've got this volume, this density. Here's our mass. So that would be the way that we incorporate that when we do so. Obviously, lungs have a different mass, bones have a different mass, but most of the organs are roughly 1 to 1.2. So you can read those ones, do it from volume, or if you want to, you can do that in our visual or our software. Our dosimetry program also can do it on the fly if you do feed it a SPECT CT or PET CT. The last thing I would say is that, you know, there is the potential to actually look at Hounsfield units, to use Hounsfield units as but there's a bilinear fit that you can do to them, where that gives you density, and then you could do it on a per voxel basis and add all the voxels that you call liver, but you would get, you know, maybe a little bit more precise mass in that, but the variation is going to be pretty small between those two methods, really. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yasser. The next question, actually, we've got several questions from William Irwin. Just to keep them in context, there are two together here, where William says the equation for whole body counts per second normalization is incorrect. That's the first question. And I wondered whether, actually, William, I've unmuted you as well. So perhaps in terms of a discussion, please feel free to come back as Andy handles this question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the whole body for normalization, it's whole bodies. It's actually the scanner's axial field of view dimension divided by scan velocity. For example, if you did a 200 centimeter whole body scan at 10 centimeters per minute, and you scan the liver in the first 100 centimeters, you draw a region around the liver, you're going to get, let's say, 100,000 counts.
Sure.
If you did that same scan at 100 centimeters instead of 200 centimeters and draw the region of interest around the liver, you're going to get the same total counts. But in this case, you would double it. And that's incorrect. So it's the axial field of view dimension divided by scan speed, and then it's independent of the total scan length.
Yeah, I mean, that scan length that I put in there is I've shortened the name. Is that the wrong? Do you know the DICOM header that might be associated with that?
I do not know actually what it is, but I know that it's axial dimension of the camera detector divided by scan velocity will correctly normalize for scan speed. In other words, the total minutes of scan time will be
I really appreciate that. I believe when I said scan length, that was a really horrible choice of words. I do mean a dimension. It is a length dimension, and I thought that was extent, or distance in z direction. And I believe that's what this DICOM tag does represent. But it's the axial dimension that I'll have to look up what that DICOM tag is. I think it meant that, but yeah, scan length does sound like time, And I want to be very clear. I did mean that as distance of the bed length. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. The other comment was with regard to those integration equations.
Yeah.
There's only one integral on the right side. It's because the converting from imaging to therapy, that's simply a ratio of 2e to the minus lambda t's.
Right.
It's not an integral. There should be one dt and one integral. So it should be f effective imaging sub t times the ratio of those two times dt, and that whole thing integrated. Right. It's not two integrals.
Yeah. Point made. I'm fairly sure that there is a way to reduce that better, but you're right. But no argument. This is still that scaling. Correct?
Oh yeah, it's just that it's not the integral from 0 to infinity of the physical t over physical imaging. That integral doesn't belong. It's just a simple ratio.
Yeah.
And there's only one dt, and so there's one integral.
Right.
Integral of all that dt.
Yeah, I think I did shortcut it for copy and paste reasons, but you're absolutely right. I think it's this page where but it does reduce. Yeah. It does reduce quite nicely.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's all I had.
Okay. No, I
actually, William, there was one more point you said about the conversion of the 6.7 days. We covered. Okay, cool.
Yeah, he recognized that he put in the day. He meant it should have been in hours for the half-life because the.
I saw that one during the presentation.
Yeah.
That's right. I admitted my mistake early.
Okay, thanks very much, then, William. Okay, the next question was from Tim Felgenhauer. Have you worked on forecasting the doses for a specific patient for the next therapy cycles with, for example, machine learning or something similar?
So, no.
Similarly, Tim, I will unmute you if you'd like to join in the conversation. Sorry, Andy, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we have not yet done anything like that. We really want to address that. We haven't yet reached that critical mass where enough people are doing dosimetry with our software to get a complete enough set of information. And actually, I should extend that. I think we aren't getting enough of that in dosimetry in the world yet to really conglomerate enough data for the. I know that the dosimetry has become required in the EU, and so it's happening more, but I just don't think we've reached that amount of data to actually get there yet. That said, it is worth doing and worth learning from. I don't know that we need machine learning to learn some of it. Not that it would hurt, but I think the first thing is just actually getting the data enough to look at it with follow-up, right? Tied to follow-up, or we're not going to learn anything. So we need to get that dosimetry. We need to look at it as a predictor. How good is it at predicting when we do these translational, when we do these theranostic part with the sentinel dose or the follow-up dose, but it needs to be tied to the follow-up so we know what those outcomes are. Otherwise, it's and that amount of integration of those I haven't seen yet to really couple those. It's on our radar and we're looking at it, but I just don't think it's there yet.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Tim, I don't know if does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, to Tim. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. Because I'm working on it, and I was wondering if you guys did something in that direction as well. So, but yeah, that's right. We need more data, but I'm trying to figure out a way as well to find something.
Well, let us know if you come up with something. Yeah.
Thank you very much, then, Tim, for your question. The next question again was from Jill Tipping, actually, regarding the fitting algorithms, and Jill's asking what fitting algorithm is used in the commercial Hermes software.
So we use a bi-exponential fit with the ability to do a trapezoidal rule for any data that doesn't fit it. So if you still have uptake, you can, because it's all bi-exponential decay, but you could actually skip the points where uptake is occurring, fit those with a trapezoidal rule, and then follow that up with exponential decay. And there's other little things like we don't allow the exponential decay past the last data point to extend beyond physical decay, because obviously that's unsustainable. But that's the major answer to that. Is it's a bi-exponential fit through curve regression.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Sure.
Thank you for that. I was just intrigued because you were looking at residuals and goodness of fit. Do you intend to use that information more in calculating or propagating uncertainties into your dosimetry calculation? This is something that a big European project has found is actually very important.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's a little bit hard to dynamically do that in a commercial software. It's not impossible. The bigger problem is that usually the number of points we have isn't significant, because, of course, these are a pain for patients to undergo some of these follow-up studies to get the correct fitting. But usually we need a little bit more. Our uncertainty in our uncertainty actually tends to be a little high. So I take your point. Definitely, we can only do as good as we have data for, but propagating the uncertainties and claiming this is my uncertainty is a great next step to implement. We haven't yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Jill. We have a question from Caleb Starlup, or Storlup. I'm sorry if I got the pronunciation wrong there, Caleb. And the question is, how would you estimate the mass of different organs from CT scan images? And again, I will.
Yeah, I kind of addressed that one. I'll stick by it. You could do a couple of things, assuming an organ mass uniformly, or using the Hounsfeld unit conversion to density by linear fit, and with both of those you could compile volume and average density or mean density, and
Those two finished 10 minutes ago.
do it that way. Does that answer the question? Again, it's something I snuck into on a previous question, so I hope it was answered then.
Yes, sir. You had already answered that question before. Thank you.
Yep, that is, of course, the problem with having everybody write down their questions before I answer them, but it's still worth it. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Caleb. And there's a question here from Me A. Actually, her question, she's left the meeting, but perhaps you could answer the question anyway, was what do you do with accounts for the standard source?
In this one, I did nothing with them. There are, what we do in our commercial software is we can use that to do that normalization. You know, I put in that counts per second normalization factor, and if I decay corrected the amount of activity in every one of those syringes, I could look at how much variation I have for there should be this much activity, I expect this many counts, how many counts do I actually have? And we would then scale the counts by the efficiency of that image, because we know how much activity should be in that syringe, and it should be, well, other than physical decay, it should be the same. So we can account for physical decay. That's what we do, is we allow with the check mark the ability to scale those standards to represent, and that gives us the ability, even if you had to switch cameras or acquisition protocols that you didn't know, if you have that standard, you can use that as another means of calibrating the efficiency between time points. But that's
Thanks,
all.
Andy.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. We've still got a number of questions here, so we've still got about 6 or 7 questions, I think, but we'll press on through. The next one may be actually answered by the following demonstration, but the question is from Asa Kendi, who says, how long does it take for a person to get efficient at Hermes software, and how long does it take to calculate each subject's dosimetry with the software?
Well, the software, I will say, I guess it kind of depends on where you start. If you're fairly decent at segmenting the images already, then the software itself takes you, a month or so of generalized use. The problem is most people don't get a significant number of dosimetries back to back, and so you kind of tend to do it and then leave it and then come back and do it and leave it, and that's not the best way. I would say if it was a priority for you, a couple of weeks would be more than enough to be very efficient at it, and then to actually, once you are efficient at it, I can do a case like we did here over the course of most of an hour, but it usually takes me being meticulous and careful 20 to 25 minutes at most. And if I'm doing it as a demo, it's more like 5 when I don't care if I get that exact right pixel shape for getting the liver perfect. But in practice, when we're doing it well, 20 to 25 minutes for a multi-spect or multi-PET, because we can translate these VOIs across, and a planar takes even less time. And you'll see this in the demo.
I hope that answers your question, AZ. If it does, then we'll carry on.
Yeah, my other question will be following that. Thanks for answering. Do you think it is better to have a couple people doing the same calculation for the patient to check each other to avoid mistakes? With the software, will that be an issue? Or one qualified person calculates and we can go with it? We are a very busy clinic, and I'm sure we will have cases quite a bit that may require dosimetry, but still I agree with you. Sometimes people do it and don't do it for a while, and it may take their skills to do it efficiently. So what would you advise? Do you think a couple people doing and checking it each other would be a better choice with the software?
If you're doing it with the software, we take a lot of those steps out, but there are numerous publications out there that have kind of shown that the biggest influencer is how you draw your segmentation. Because once we get the numbers, of course, then the rest of it is just a matter of don't transpose a number, right? I mean, we feed in, that part gets very straightforward when done correctly, but the part that's tricky is the segmentation. And who does it determines that segmentation. The good news is that, especially in organ level dosimetry, we're going to make this assumption that everybody then fits this model that all these S factors were calculated for. And both the good thing and the bad thing is that there's going to be a pretty good cause of error there. So dosimetry, one of the problems we have with it is that the error bars on what we expect are significant. And we can do our best to minimize it, but we're going to see that unless it's just grossly done, the segmentation is going to probably fall within the error bars of what the change in patient anatomy from model to actual patient is. And so, of course, that's a big plus for Voxel dosimetry, which has its own problems with what it is. But I would say, in truth, you could do it with one person to remain consistent. And that one person's evaluations, they may always be 5% higher than somebody else's, but they will be consistent throughout. Whereas if you're having multiple people draw these regions and they consistently draw them a little smaller, or you have multiple and they vary, you may not see those trends. So I think there's something to be said for keeping it in the hands of one person when you can, just for consistency. But at the same time, multiple people will show you that variation. So I would suggest reading those papers, and I can't take a stand on it, but I will acknowledge that there is some individuality in the answers you get based completely on segmentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy, and thanks for your question, Asa. There's a few more questions. The next one is from Isong Assam, and the question is, how is the normalized cumulative activity calculated for a SPECT stroke planar data set?
Stick around. I'll show it in the other one rather than try and do it here because it takes a little time. But the basic gist of it is this: we are going to take a planar, we're going to flatten it into a pseudo planar. Take the SPECT, flatten it into a pseudo planar, and then align it with the closest whole body that we have in time. When we do that, we now know the extent to which the SPECT image and the whole body image overlap. If you think about it, what we're looking at is the total number of counts in that overlap region should be all of the counts in the SPECT, but it should be some section of counts, or there should be some counts. And once we've done that for one patient, one calculation, we have an efficiency that should tell us this many counts in SPECT is this many counts in planar. To go back and forth with as we need. And then depending on what we have for normalization, if we have quantitative SPECT, well, that should be our gold standard. And we should do everything as a function relative from whole body to give us what the shape of the curve is, but that curve should go through the value of that we have quantitatively in the SPECT when we define that region. So we've got a volume of interest that is, let's say, the liver, and there is exactly 5 millicurie in the total liver, where then we would get what that clearance rate looks like from the planar. That's our method for doing it. Then there's different ways, and that's why I almost hate that question, because it's like, if this then, if this then, if this then. That's how we do it when we have the quantitative SPECT. We still get that efficiency. If we do everything from planars because we don't have quantitative SPECT, then we can do exactly what we did for the whole body, but now we can say that there is something for shine through. There is something for the counts that we're getting above the kidney and below the kidney, which might include liver. And if we take that region of interest in the kidneys and we use that efficiency, we can scale that shape down to the percentage that we get. So there's all kinds of ways to use that information to get the best possible answer, but that's the mechanism by which we start.
So, Isong, does that answer your question? We will be doing a demonstration following this.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll wait for the demonstration. Okay. It's a little bit abstract, so
yeah, I realize I don't have any good way to show it until I start that software up. So.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. The next question is from Michael Payne-McGlenn, and it says, with the assumption of the biological clearance being constant for a given ligand, if there was enough data showing that there was a known change in the pharmacokinetics between the isotopes of the theranostic couplet, how would you implement that?
I do think we'd have to model it, but I will say that it would pretty much negate most of what we do in this case. I mean, the only time we can make that assumption is if we do believe that there's a correlation between the biological clearance for the ligand, and if you don't have that, if you can prove that doesn't exist, that it behaves differently, then you shouldn't be using that imaging agent to determine it. And you know, I mean, you think about the far off-topic example of using something that doesn't have the same properties. Well, I could use MMA to do neuroendocrine tumor. Well, there's no correlation between those two. Well, sorry, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. I meant dotatate. I said the wrong one. There's no correlation between the mechanism by which MMA is taken up in as opposed to Lutathera. And I don't want to try and make that claim for the spheres. That was not intentional, and I'm not making that claim. But for MMA versus, something with an active ligand that's different, you wouldn't expect that biologic to be the same. And if you don't have that biologic, it's the same concept. Even if it is the same ligand, if you could prove that that biological aspect of it is significantly different, maybe because of the radiation breaking the bonds at different rates, then you shouldn't be using that as your sentinel dose. The point of a sentinel dose is to try and maintain the same biological clearance. Otherwise, there's nothing to draw from it.
Michael, did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, no, thank you for answering the question, Andy. The only comment I would have is my question was more with regards to less extreme examples, such as the one that you gave, but more if there was detectable but small differences, not enough so that it would invalidate the use of the ligand in a theranostic couplet, but if there was enough that it would be a distinction worth factoring in to the calculations, could that be factored in? But I guess you kind of answered that.
Yeah, I would say that if there isn't that same, if you could introduce maybe a third functional difference between biological, activity biological for imaging versus if you could put that into a function, you could go to the basic concept here and implement it, as long as it's something that, completely behaves exactly the same way each time. So yeah, in your more subtle part, I took it to an extreme. I think you could, if you had a very well-behaved difference in biological for therapy and imaging, just plug that in here and account for it. But you'd have to know a whole lot about that difference.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for answering that.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. We're on to the last three questions now. There's a question here from Tahani. It's a kind of linked question about counts per second normalization. The first is, there was a question about it apparently changing from 1 to 1.5 the next day, and a linked question saying, is the counts per second normalization what we called system sensitivity?
Yeah, actually, I didn't cover that as well as I'd like to, and maybe I should have left it out. What I was trying to get with there was that if there was some systematic change in the acquisition protocol, you could use that CPS normalization to account for it. So the quick, brief thing that I did state as an example would be maybe they used a longer acquisition time or a slower velocity in this whole body case to acquire the first two studies, or actually what quite often happens is a faster one because we reach some kind of camera saturation or whatever. And then as the stuff starts to decay, you do anything to change that acquisition protocol, because you now don't have as much activity in the patient. You might scan a little slower, or you might change the collimator. This is something we did back in my scanning days. We actually, for the first few images, it was an iodine, and we would use a high energy collimator just to filter out quite a bit. We'd get attenuation from that high energy, or from the high energy collimator, rather than the medium, which we would switch to as we went down the line. So you can do a lot of things that might change your sensitivity, and that was my way of trying to fit in some way to account for those changes in sensitivity or counts per second if you just change the scan velocity. so that's what they were from. That's why I did it as a thought exercise, and then I didn't explain it well enough maybe to have really followed through with it. But that's what the counts per second normalization was for me, and it is a little bit different than the system sensitivity. I assume the system sensitivity is going to stay relative the same through the whole process. If it isn't, I addressed that from an earlier question with the standard in there. This is more about like systemic protocol changes between one acquisition and another that should give a well, system sensitivity change, but it's going to be more based on protocol of acquisition not being exactly the same for all of them, so that it changes the overall sensitivity by something you know, right, rather than cracked crystal or degrading PM tube or something like that.
Tahani, did that answer your question? Perhaps you have no ability to use a microphone, so I'll assume that's the case. And by all means, send a typed question if you need to. The next question was from Arif Sheikh, and it's actually regarding voxel-based dosimetry, which is a little bit different to what we were talking about here. Yeah. And it's also talking about our own software, whether that base dosimetry generates dose volume histograms. And
brief answer is that our voxel-based dosimetry, which we didn't cover here, puts out a dose map, and then our software that interprets it can generate dose volume histograms. So yes, we do. You didn't see them in here because I was really focusing on concepts and used organ dosimetry as my tableau for that. So.
Voxel dosimetry, by the way, will be covered in September. There will be another seminar in September that will cover the background of voxel dosimetry in more detail.
Great. So Arif, maybe if you tune in September, you could find out more about the voxel-based dosimetry and dose volume histogramming. The final question, well, there's two questions from Martin Tornai. The first is, sounds like a statement, so maybe you can correct me if that's not the case, Martin. But it says, when drawing ROIs on later scans, you can move the ROI to be configured to an earlier scan if the patient had shifted between scans. So that may be a question saying, can you?
Yeah, and he's absolutely right. If it is a statement, you certainly can, and you can actually edit them, which is a technique that I use a lot. So I'll copy what I've done, and even though it's not in the right place or something has shifted relative, I can move all of the ROIs, then I could move an individual one, and then I could take one and edit it and add an extra lobe if that's what's needed, or to exclude maybe some gut activity that got too close to the one. So we have that range of tools. Like I said before, I used our program for the segmentation because I know it and I have it, but I wasn't trying to focus on that. But yeah, I will say it's a very good tool. I may be a little biased, but it is good for segmentation. There is a lot of capability of saving yourself some time when you know all those tricks. I just wasn't trying to completely focus on that in this talk, but you are correct. All of it is possible.
So this is Martin. Hi. Thank you, Andrew. This was a great presentation. I'm learning a lot, certainly doing this. Having done some patients now, samples and things like that, what I've realized is that you need to do a pixel conversion, right? Or an area conversion if you do change the ROIs. So, you know, manually, right. So manually I can do that. Does the Hermes software automatically adjust for changes in ROIs for organs?
Well, yeah, as kind of pointed out here, on the organ level dosimetry, all we're really doing is getting the counts in that organ. So if you change the shape, that's fine. I will say that, you got to be careful in apples to apples, but since the organs can actually change shape, if the idea is to get all the counts in that organ, you certainly can. To your question, there was also, and I ignored it in this, there's also the ability to put a background for absolutely every thing that you can draw. And so if you use that background, which would do subtraction, that will subtract a different amount of background for a different sized ROI or VOI. So yes, it's capable of dealing with it. Without the background, it's rudimentary. It's just going to increase the number of counts to include what you've included in yours, and it's still on the user to make the best use of segmentation to get the most accurate representation of the counts in that organ.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Martin, you actually made another statement, which is that the standard source can normalize the daily variations in the scanner sensitivity, scan speed, etc. And Andrew, it might be good to comment on that, perhaps.
Yeah, we talked about that when somebody asked what I use those standards for. Again, if you put the little check mark in it, if you've drawn the standard on every time point, we make the assumption that that's the same syringe, but obviously it's physically decaying as time goes on. But we know that that's just physical decay. So we can decay correct, and we can say this is the amount of counts I expect. So let's lock the first one. This is, 1, air quotes here, for 5,000 counts, whatever it is 1. Decay correct that down to the next time point. Maybe it's supposed to be 0.75. And if that's not 0.75 of those 5,000 counts, then we can adjust the scaling to make it what it should be, which is what we do. And yeah, it's a nice feature. It's especially useful. Sometimes the worst happens in dosimetry, right? So you've got room 3, whatever camera that is, scheduled for dosimetry. The person comes back 4 days in a row, and on day 2, somebody bangs the crystal with the collimator change, and you have to emergency do it in a different room on a different camera with no expectations of the same efficiency. And the good news is that the standard would let you compensate for that. So it's an insurance policy. It also can detect small daily variations, though hopefully for most modern cameras, those variations are pretty small. It also finds things like, the tech used the wrong parameters and acquired it faster than they were supposed to. And it lets you find those and compensate for those too.
May I also ask that in the images that you showed early on, this series of 6, or a set of 6 images for that one patient, it looked like the standard was actually a different size in all of them. Do you all use a standard size for your dosimetry standard? Because if it's too small and you're doing iodine, you get all kinds of star artifacts, right?
Right. I will say this is Hermes doesn't have a hospital. We don't gather our own data, and this is subject to the generous people who gave it to us. I think that it's relatively the same size. The problem is it can, on the first time point, it's an amount, right? And the patient is significantly more on total. But as the patient decays faster, it starts to become a brighter and brighter thing as time goes on. So I think maybe it is a little bit of bleed out. It also appears to be at different heights. And also, of course, the anterior almost looks like it's going through a bed, which doesn't make any sense. But it's diffuse. So I can't tell you exactly what happened here, but you're right. It does seem to change a little bit. The expectation is that the same vial is used for that calibration. Not so hot as to star artifact and not so small as to be hard to track, but use what you've got, I guess, is the caveat there. So syringe is what usually gets used.
And then just to follow up on that, you would still take geometric means of the standard source, even
Absolutely.
if they're different
Yep.
shapes, anterior and posterior. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you, Martin. And that actually completes the set of questions we received. So thank you all very much for the questions, and also to Andy for his responses. These interactive sessions are really what make this educational series special. So thank you again for all those who contributed. So Andy, back to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to pause my screen for a second. So you're going to see the for all demos and requests for a second. Based on what some people said there, I'm going to change up my dosimetry example that we're going to do, which is quite fine. Let me grab the one that actually has a SPECT CT, which is not the one that I used for our example up till now. But all right, here it is starting up. I'll go ahead and unfreeze my screen. And in this particular case, because I have already drawn left, right, and kidneys and the liver in the volume. But I want to talk about what we're doing here. You'll see everything this way. So I've added the complication of adding a SPECT. But otherwise, you know, you're going to see this do what we did. So you would do the region drawing, but let me begin by saying the first thing we would do is just evaluate how good of an overlap we have. And this is pretty good, but if I didn't like it, I have the potential to manually move my pseudoplanar to where I think it should be, which, you know, fine, somewhere in here. And then I can even let the registration, automatic registration, do that. So I would like to keep my 1 day, which by the way, it picks automatically the one that's closest in time point. So it's my 1 day anterior and my volume pseudoplanar. I'll do a rigid transformation. Not that we should have much rotation, but you know, maybe. So I'll let it do that. It found this, and it says this is the best overlap of those two. And like I said, what this is doing, the pseudoplanar is essentially, you know, summing the Z and Y components and leaving the X. Oh, yeah, the Y component leaving the X and Z. To basically what would we see if we were doing an anterior view. And that gives us that efficiency part. So that's what the program did right there. You could make an argument for whether or not that was a great fit, and I will probably alter it a little. It appears a control is somewhere other than where I want it to be. There we go. And I'll just go back to manual. The accuracy of this is subject to just how good you're going to get anyway, so that's good enough. All right. Then we would go in and we would draw our regions. And again, with a lot of Hermes products, if you're not familiar, we just kind of work our way down the tool set in the right-hand side when you're doing these calculation type programs, what we call processing. I don't have a standard here. I've got regions of interest. Like I said, I've got volumes of interest already drawn. I will include the spleen so you can see what that looks like. So if I take the spleen, I can draw a single one on the top. Then I can skip a few. As long as the shape is just kind of growing similarly, we can interpolate between. Likewise, if I don't like this before I do anything else, maybe I want to edit it, and I could clean this up. And that should clean that up quite a bit. Let's continue on. Maybe here's another good place because it is changing shape. We want to grab that spleen. Ooh, too much coffee. And go down to here maybe and draw yet another one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just interpolate between all those. So we'll take this spleen, grab my regions, and interpolate between, which now has generated all these ones for every slice. in between. And if any of them aren't very good, well, that turned out pretty nice, actually, even despite my little bit of mess up. But if I needed to, I could come in here. I could edit this ROI. I could just include what I missed. So when we're happy with what we've got for volumes, then we come over and we go to the ROI list, and we would draw something on this. Now, what we can do, we've got, in this particular case, I've got 4 time points. And I would say that probably this time point right here is the easiest to make out the spleen and kidney. We'll find a liver example here in a second. And I'm going to try really hard not to put the left on the right, but I bet I do. I always, because it doesn't matter, I don't spend as much time thinking about it as maybe I should. I've got the right kidney in volume lined up with the liver side. So that would be right here. To stay consistent, we'll call that it. We will do left kidney over here. And we'll do spleen. Again, well, those are 2 really poor choices for color on a demonstration, because I'm sure those aren't coming across as nice for you as they did for me. Let's find a different time point where the liver is really highlighted. And this should, I'll do it on this one. But we'd pick just wherever we see the liver most well defined. Yeah, let's get rid of that one. That's a mistake. I'll delete that. That's spleen. Let's do that again on the liver. Pay real close attention to your anterior and posteriors. Do as I say, not as I do. And then when we're happy with all of them, we can come in here and we can copy across. I don't have much in the way of a lesion to really follow here. So this is what we've got. And we can, move any one of them if it's not quite right. There's certainly a lot of overlap in that one. Actually, there is a lesion in that liver. We could have done that, but I didn't. That might be ureter. But I did see one here in the SPECT. So there's something here that I don't, that's got to be this right here, that I could have followed as a lesion, but I did not. When I've drawn my regions, I'm happy with them. I close it. I go to our curve fitting, and here I automatically update the masses of the organs that I've drawn volumetrically. So those are in red, and you can see that had I done a lesion, it would also give me a mass of it. I have recovery coefficients and something else I could have done here and didn't. If I had that lesion, it would have entirely been in what I called the liver. And I could say that lesion was in the liver. It would subtract the volume from lesion 1 out of the liver volume. It would subtract the counts out of lesion 1 from the liver counts. And we would end up with normal liver, assuming we, defined all of the lesions that were in the liver. I didn't draw it, so we can't do that. The last thing is, this is an adult male, lutetium 177. This is actually about 300 megabecquerel that was injected. And so we have now just the last thing is our normalization. Whole body planar scans is what we will do. This scan was from before Quantitative SPECT was being acquired at this site. So we'll just say that the first whole body does include all of the activity. And here's that check mark that was talked about in the questions. Use standard to normalize sensitivity between time points. I don't have a standard, so I won't use it. Another neat little feature I'll talk about quickly. Red marrow can, as a source organ, can be defined with some of these papers say that if you draw a vertebrae in the lower spine, that counts as 6.7% of the total marrow as a stand-in. So if you want to do that, you can. I didn't draw it, so we won't, and I don't see any uptake in it, so it's of little value. Olinda has that limitation where the kidneys are kidneys and not left and right. It's the same with lung. And so if your patient has surgically had their kidney resected, you will only get a left kidney as an example. But when you go to put those counts that were found in that left kidney into the model, it's going to spread them across the two kidneys, and you're going to get half the concentration. So in order to kind of compensate for that, you can double the kidney activity or the lung activity to account for whatever reason, not having drawn both kidneys, especially if they're not there, right? You can change these times of administration to calculate the dose from what you have. It'll do decay correction, but you also, even if you're going to do this first whole body, if you could, instead of, as you saw in the demonstration in the first part, they had cathetered that person and caught the urine, and that was put in the image so that it was in the image. You can certainly still do that. However, you could also collect that, not put it in the image, but somehow count it, put that amount in here, and we would subtract that out as well. Last little neat feature that, again, we're not doing, but just to show you, talk to you about what is here. The external dose rate data is the ability to do something like take a probe measurement from 6 feet away, use one image, one SPECT, one PET, maybe one whole body planar, and then have a whole body curve clearance based on these arbitrary readings from a whole body probe 6 feet away. If you don't have the imaging we do, it's a nice alternative to not doing anything. But I mean, when you've got it, we'll do the first whole body planar as ours. I didn't draw a total body, so it will draw one for me using the whole image. And since we don't have a standard, that's, we're not including something that we shouldn't. And this is what our curve fit looks like. So this is a bi-exponential curve fit that it's attempting to do right now. The red line, the red dots are from the whole bodies alone without any other information. This pink dot is using, again, remember, we use the first body, the first planar whole body has all the counts. And so I think I talked about this in one of the questions, but now maybe it takes a little shape. So I've got this shape for the liver. And if I were thinking about what that means in this, that's like a cylinder in the shape of the liver that goes from the front of the patient all the way to the back, because we don't have any depth in whole body. We do some with Geo Mean, but same concept. But of course, that cylinder would also include this right kidney and the spleen and the activity in the tissue above the liver and below. So by having that sensitivity calibration that we did by doing that alignment, I can say that these counts are what's in my liver, right? It goes through this amount of activity, and this gap between the red dot and the pink dot being how much is in the after that equation for calibration is in this liver. This is my amount I would overestimate from whole body alone, because I would have that shine through. So that gap's kind of important. It means something to us. But then we curve fit the same shape from the red dots to go through that pink dot. And that blue line is what we're going to actually use to integrate underneath and to get our normalized cumulative activity. So I need to check each one of these. That one's still a decent fit, but I could start on the second time frame. Let's see if there's one where that's better. The liver is pretty much predominant, so there's not a big gap there. Mostly because that tumor is probably, counted in both. But spleen, same thing. And total body. So let's go back to, say, the spleen. Let's go back to whichever one it was that was maybe questionable. So the right kidney appears to still be in the uptake phase at the first time point. And I could say start at the second time point. I'm still doing, even though it's not shown here, numerical integration, trapezoidal rule from here to here. And then I start with the blue line curve, which should be down on the blue line. That's a graphical problem that I should have seen coming. Anyway, it is doing the curve fit on the blue line, and I apologize for confusion that comes from that. We'll get that cleared up. After I've done those curve fits and I've gone through all of them, it's a matter of hitting this button, which is going to generate a report to Olinda. Olinda's going to run in the background. It's going to have all the choices we made. It's an adult male. That was in the drop down. It was, and you could choose from any of them. The fact that it was lutetium, which was also chosen. The fact that we had these residence times for these organs already put in. All of that as a save file for Olinda gets passed to it, it runs, and it sends back a report, which we integrate into here. So when I say OK, all right, there it is, there it is. We get a little indicator as a screen capture of what our regions and volumes of interest look like, what our curve fitting looked like on a log scale for each of the organs, color-coded. We get the uptake values that we measured. This can be saved out to a comma-separated value for Excel, but it's also a screen capture. So every value that we got at what time point. What curve fitting values we used to generate our residence time. And finally, our doses. So we get the same result, but you saw the whole process. It's certainly much faster. Extra faster because I already had my volumes of interest drawn, but you saw me draw the spleen. And other than being maybe a little more meticulous, this is what it takes to go from start to finish with our program for a whole body with a SPECT CT. The same program can be run for SPECT. And I saw somebody ask this, what is the difference if we're doing all SPECT, right? Well, aside from drawing the regions to be volumetric to get all the counts inside of it, or if you've got it, becquerels per cc from a quantitative SPECT, it's still the same idea. We're going to take the counts at each time point. We're going to generate an XY scatter plot and we're going to curve fit said points to try and get what the long-term behavior inside that organ is. And then we're going to feed that into Olinda. And if we're talking voxel dosimetry, take that same argument for an organ, move it down to a voxel, do everything the same, and instead of feeding it to Olinda, we feed it to our own written program that's going to do a Monte Carlo method to figure out where the dose distribution from that source comes from. But the concept of take images, figure out what activity is in them, how it's going in time, and evaluating it through some method to convert it to dose, be it Olinda with the S factors or Monte Carlo to generate the voxel level, stays the same in all. This is our organ level program. I've other than having the volumes, this was run in real time. This is a real case. I may have been a little bit more careful with my regions if I was actually treating this person. These are chicken scratch and ugly, but that is what it looks like. Any questions on this one?
There haven't been any coming in on the question chat, no.
Like I said, this one was more, I wanted to show a demo of this if you wanted to see what our software looked like and how much you can actually streamline things. If you've got an idea of what you want to do, but you put it all in one place under one umbrella and automate a lot of these transference of things that we had to do before. How do I normalize SPECT data to the whole body planar? So, like I said, what I've done here, if you can think of it, this whole SPECT, let me bring the color table down quite a bit. I've created a planar by this summation that just tells me where it aligns on this whole body. And that registration that I did at the very beginning, that is for the very purpose of figuring out all the counts in this overlap region of the whole body. So ignore this for a second. Oops, other way. You know, that was right here and right here. If I count all the places in those Z slices, counts in the whole body, let's say that's 1,000 counts. And then the SPECT total in all of the SPECT has 10,000 counts. then I know that 10 counts, 10,000 divided by 1,000, 10 counts in the SPECT is equal to 1 count in whole body. And from now on, I use that conversion factor anytime I need to go from one to the other. So I look at the counts in the volume, I go through the conversion process, and I say, you know, here's my counts that I have in this volume scaled to the amount of counts you would see in a whole body, or what activity those represent, what percent injected dose that represents. Every count is just two number systems, and I've got that conversion factor to take me between them.
Actually, Martin came up with a couple more questions while you were speaking there. Martin, maybe you'd like to, I've unmuted you, so maybe you'd like to bring those up with Andy right now.
Well, I'll ask them, but I pretty much answered them. So the impression that I'm getting is that first of all, there only appears to be one body position for the SPECT scan. So it looks like you're, you know, chest to pelvis there. Yep. And so what you're using the SPECT data for is not actually the dosimetry, but to get a finer representation of the whole body planar scans and the ROIs for the various organs. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to look at it. What I would say is that there's let's say that we start with the concept of whole body being, you know, the best we can do, because we don't have a SPECT yet, and we can do these organs, and we know that we're overestimating how many counts are in the liver because we have to draw a region that is everything above and below. When we take the SPECT into account, what we're doing is we know that the shape of the liver is probably pretty well represented by the whole bodies, but we think the magnitude is off. So we shift the magnitude to go through the amount of counts in the SPECT, but we're keeping the shape. We're not really changing per se the ROI or VOI. What we're doing is kind of rescaling the counts in there to account for how much is above and below.
Right. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. What I don't understand though is that how is that related to? So my impression of voxel-based dosimetry was that you were doing a whole body SPECT scan, and then literally on a voxel by voxel basis, you were calculating what the radioactive.
And for voxel, that's absolutely true. Our voxel program does not accept planar at all.
Oh, okay. Okay.
At least at this time. We have discussed whether there would be something to be gained by having a per organ clearance rate coming from whole body, because it is a card to get multi-time point SPECT from a patient. It's a big inconvenience. But at this time, our SPECT program, our Voxel program accepts only multi-time point SPECT or multi-time point PET data as its input, because we need to follow per voxel through time in order to get those clearance rates per voxel. And so the planar does not help us with that. You're right. This is purely for organ level dosimetry. Like I said, we'll do a voxel later, and when that one comes about, I can show you the end product of that is a dose map where I have what looks like a SPECT or a PET, but the values, instead of being activity, are dose. And you can follow that, and then you can divide it how you want to, but the input for it is SPECT or PET, multi-time point, or single time point if you want to do physical decay for, spheres or whatever.
Well, if you're using the Explorer PET CT system from Davis, right, then you're going to get the whole body in one shot. So
yeah. Well, and that's great, and that's I look forward to getting some access to that kind of data. We don't have it yet, but you're right. If I got that whole SPECT, value from it, I suppose again it still comes down to something we could do with a partial view, which is to say we could clear the distribution for the part we see, by the activity rate from a planar. We haven't implemented that yet. The ultimate is to have individual voxel kinetics, but we could go to organ level kinetics, voxel level magnitudes, and do Monte Carlo dosimetry to get voxel from there. So,
great, thank you.
Let's see, there was another question.
Yeah, there's another question from Paul Gape, who asks, is there mass scaling of the S factor for the target regions that you happen to have outlined, but not for the ones that you haven't? I'm just putting, Paul, I've actually unmuted you, but Andy, maybe you could address that one.
Yeah, is the mass scaling for the S factor? So Olinda provides from, actually the reason for Olinda 2.0 was because the ICRP came out with another standard for what the average human adult male liver and spleen and whatever masses were. For the ones that we don't define something from the regions, the ones that are in black are actually just that representative average dose directly from, and they match with the Phantom. So that's how I got the ones that I don't take a reading for that weren't in red, is they revert back to that ICRP manual of what the average mass for that organ is. And if we have an ability to scale it better with what we see, we do. If we don't, we use that. Does that answer the question?
I've unmuted Paul, but maybe he hasn't got a microphone. So, oh, sorry. Yes, no mic. Sorry, but yes, thank you. Thank you, Paul, for confirming that.
Perfect.
I don't think we have any more questions.
Right.
So I had a batch come through right at the end there, but there don't seem to be any more right now.
All right. Well, that was. I appreciate very thoughtful questions. Nobody let me get away with anything, which is great. I've got something to research from the audience on my axial dimension and maybe make it better. But I really appreciate this. Thank you for listening to me talking about what dosimetry, how we've approached it, what our software does in the background, showing you guys our software in function. You know, tried to make this one a little more practical. Hope I didn't go too far the wrong way. Thank you for sticking with me on all of it. I'll put up this last slide here and just say, if you have questions specific to dosimetry, feel free to reach out to me. My email is right there on the bottom, andrew.preto@hermesmedical.com. If you have questions for requesting demos, learn more about our system or us as a company, you can reach us at medical.education@hermesmedical.com, so we'll get back to you with a follow-up. And one of the other questions we saw, video recording was made of this. You'll have to give me a little while for it to compile, but we'll see if we can't make that available, as well as the slides, though I don't know how much the slides will be of great benefit here, as it was more of a practical, and I did a lot of stuff that wasn't on the slides, but we'll make those available as soon as as we get them compiled, because it's going to take a little time to compress these. Otherwise, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Antti. And thank you, everyone.
Have a great day. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.